Hey guys, what's up? Welcome back. City Walk, City Wall here, and this is Kobayashi Island. I'll spare you all from the spiel about what this series is, but if you're curious about what's been built up into this point or how anything was set up, definitely go back and check out some of the older videos in the series. Anyways, this episode I think was really a lot of fun, maybe the most fun to make any of the episodes so far. And it's funny because when I started, I wasn't thinking that I would end up making the ferry terminal at this point in the series, but as I was building, it sort of made sense to do. What I started out attempting to do with this harbor was kind of make like an old harbor and then remodel parts of it bit by bit. And so that's sort of what you see me doing now. I just placed down some of the old buildings and I'm just kind of getting it to look like what it did back in the day. In general, I've been thinking about this downtown a lot in terms of its history and how it might have transformed and grown over time. So I was thinking that when the island was much less populated and it was just the old town here, the downtown area would have been like the main empty land to expand into. I'm imagining probably around the same time that like the Central Park got built, maybe like the turn of the 20th century, they also built the city's main harbor here in this downtown area. We're on an island, so there's very little space, and a new large harbor at that point would have been crucial in order for the city to grow and expand into downtown and be able to import what it needs at the time. So a harbor right in the city center would have made sense. You know, ships can pull right up and offload goods right to the areas that they're destined for. So what I set out to do was build an area that would have been this old harbor in the downtown. As the years went on and the downtown got bigger and bigger around this harbor, it was probably getting a little cramped for space and becoming like an eyesore for all the people living downtown. And at a certain point, as cargo ships were getting larger and the island was growing and having to import more and more stuff, they probably decided that a new, much bigger, more modern harbor on the far side of the island, away from the downtown and the nicer parts of the city, was the thing to do. I haven't built this big new harbor yet, but I'm imagining that when it happened in the history of Kobayashi Island, this older downtown harbor went into sort of like disrepair, became abandoned, and slowly, bit by bit, they sort of started remodeling things and bringing it into like, you know, what became some of the more modern parts in the entire city, because it's very recent that this area became available. The first thing I did was I placed down big blocks of dilapidated sort of warehouses along with the overall shape of the piers. My plan was to place down a rough idea of how the harbor looked after it was abandoned and then start remodeling it and replacing buildings from there, eventually, you know, making it look new and nice. What I wanted was an area that had sort of a cohesive overall shape left over from the original purpose of the main harbor on the island, but then individual parts of it were clearly torn down and redone throughout the years, and now what's on the piers are much more modern and give this area a whole new look. So for the first pier, you saw me a second ago look at Google Maps of San Francisco. I took a little inspiration from there, from downtown. San Francisco actually has a pretty similar history to what I'm imagining here, where there's piers that line the water right along the downtown because that's where the harbor used to be. But once the Oakland harbor got built across the bay, the downtown piers kind of got abandoned and eventually gentrified and remodeled, and now it's full of offices and shops and maybe even some apartment buildings. So I found a nice vanilla building, removed the signage and props that were all over it, placed that down over and over on the first pier, and used the painter mod to make all the buildings the same color. This building, I was definitely thinking would be like gentrified offices or apartments, and was probably one of the first piers to get completely remodeled since the building looks a little dated. So it's not completely modern, but definitely pretty nice and relatively upscale compared to obviously what was there before. I also took a little more inspiration from San Francisco here and built a little marina next to the pier. I was thinking that these water areas between the piers should have some sort of more modern uses nowadays, now that cargo ships aren't pulling up to the docks anymore. And a marina made sense to me since it's something they have at the San Francisco piers, and since the piers themselves kind of give some protection to the ocean waves. I also put down like a yacht club along the water that gives access to the marina, which has like a cool little custom clock tower that I built using the Ronix 69 expressway pillars and a vanilla prop clock asset. So the next pier, the middle one, I was thinking and looking at the map, and I realized what really needed to go here was my ferry terminal that I had originally planned to put somewhere else, but it really just made the most sense to put it here. I wasn't planning on doing this until much later in the series, but I just couldn't help it. I think these piers, the more I was thinking about it, probably originally served both passenger and cargo. And even after the cargo left for the harbor on the other side of the island, I don't see why passenger ferries would have stopped coming here. So it wasn't really my original intention to do the ferry terminal at this in this episode, but it just made sense because I'm just, especially this episode, but really overall, I'm just really trying to think about the history of the island. So I'm imagining that there used to be an old ferry terminal here on one of the piers, and at some point pretty recently, they tore down the whole thing and built a new big fancy ferry port with 4 different stops and a huge ferry terminal building. I think the style of this ferry terminal, you'll see in a little bit, is maybe a little over the top, but I personally kind of like it, and I think it is fitting considering that we're on an island with no access besides ferries and airplanes. And so besides the airport, this building is going to be the main way that anyone leaves or enters the island. So I think making it a little bit over the top just sort of makes sense. Just to basically explain what I'm doing here, you see me placing down the sides of the pier and the surface of the pier. For the sides, I've been using the Ronix 69 docks pack, dock walls, and then ploppable pavement to make the surface. Right now I'm using also Ronix 69 expressway pillars to make the sides of these walkways, and some stairs to kind of get you up to the walkways. I end up using a lot of the simple pavement roads to either lift up or lower terrain in specific ways around these piers. And this walkway that you see me building now, I'm just placing down the road itself that I end up replacing and making it into a simple pavement road that has this upper level that allows access to the ferry stop, and then a series of lower roads that hold down the terrain against the seafloor underneath. For the pillars of the walkway, I use the Ronix 69 expressway pillars again, as well as some railing and metal post props. And then up above, I put some large glass awnings and some lights for when it's evening. These particular walkways were a little bit more involved than what I usually like to build, but I sort of think they deserve the extra care just because of the importance of this place and how visible it's going to be in the skyline right along the water in downtown, and just again the fact that this is the only place to get on and off the island, really, and now especially, but later on once the airport is built, it's going to be one of the only. Last episode I was sort of mentioning how I'm building obviously a Japanese themed city, but taking some inspiration from other places as well. I just wanted to come back to that and sort of reiterate, because I know some people may want to see a city that's really authentic or a replica of a real Japanese place, or something that's strictly Japanese inspired, or just something along those lines. And obviously this city isn't that. I mean, it's kind of impossible to copy anything in City Skylines, but for me personally, my goal here is to use the general Japanese aesthetic, as well as a few other real places, and concepts, and use those to inform what's like a completely fictional city of Kobayashi Island. For instance, if I was thinking, like I was last episode, like, should this intersection be a roundabout or not? I would look at Google Maps and notice that Tokyo doesn't have many roundabouts, so maybe I wouldn't make one. But in other cases with these piers, I'm not really taking much inspiration from Tokyo at all. Tokyo doesn't have piers like this as far as I can tell, but I felt it was fitting here because of the history, the made-up history of this island, and just thinking about its geography and how that relates to its history. So I know other people build much more real-looking and detailed and authentic Japanese cities than I can, but that's not 100% the goal here. Kobayashi Island is a Japanese-style city, but one that's informed and grown out of the unique fact that it's on a tiny little island. It's a city whose goal is to look awesome and great from a distance, and not necessarily close up, and it may have some non-Japanese characteristics, but that's okay for me because those characteristics are informed by the geography and the history and the layout of the city, and it feels more real and natural looking than a strictly copy of Tokyo or anything. Having a tiny city on an island, gives you limitations, and you have to think about things differently than if you're on a much larger island like the islands of Japan. So in general, I feel like thinking about the history of the island or the place that you're building is really important to making a city feel natural in this game, which is why I made these piers first by building how they were in the past and then demolishing parts and remodeling it. So I'm also trying to build out areas of the city in order of which they were built in the history of the islands, how they naturally grew, and which one came first and which one came later. Like in terms of cargo and importing and exporting, I built the old town harbor first, and then later on in the history of the island, this downtown harbor got built. And then later on in the series, I'll do the huge new harbor on the other side of the island and the airport, sort of in the order in which they were created in the island's history, so that all the pieces fit together cohesively. As you're expanding your city, I feel like it's important to make these informed decisions about where new places should go in general. But for instance, like in Kobayashi Island, if I were to build another hospital on the island, beyond the one that I already made in Old Town, like what kind of area would be the next place that someone would want to build a hospital? It wouldn't just be like a random place. It wouldn't be the nearest open patch of land available. It'd be deliberate, and it'd be a thought out placing of the hospital. Like, maybe as the downtown expanded and Old Town wasn't where the major concentration of people on the island are anymore. It's becoming out of the way for some of the citizens. Maybe they build a hospital in a more dense part of the city, but that means that the building is spread out over a few blocks in just areas where they were able to buy up little pieces of land. Or maybe a university is opening up on the island and they have the money and the land to build a new hospital there, but that means that it's on campus, and that's a little out of the way as well. So I feel like thinking about things like this are always really important to make a city look realistic. So that's definitely what I was trying to do here with these piers. Like, why are they here? What's their history? When did they get built? And like, how do they fit into the city as a whole? Anyways, I just want to change gears, wrap things up here. I'm almost at the end. The last pier I made, you see me finishing it up now, is like a modern office building with some nice cherry blossom trees around it and a little parking lot at the end of this road. It's like the service road for all three of the piers. You can probably tell I really enjoyed making these piers and blabbing to you all about why I did what I did. Sorry for the rant. I know it's a little much, but hopefully maybe you found it a little bit useful in terms of thinking about your own city. So next episode is going to be a continuation of this one, building out even more of this gentrified harbor area. And we'll get to place down the very first skyscraper on the island. So I'm pretty excited. As always, thank you for watching, and I'll see you next time.